train slows into the platform. The doors open. And where there should be a gap, a step, a breath of space, there is a wall of people. Shoulder against shoulder, bag against coat, no room to lift a hand. This is the most crowded railway on Earth. At the height of the morning, its busiest lines run at 180% of the capacity they were built for. One line, the Tozai, runs at 199. That is not a figure of speech. It means the carriage holds twice the bodies it was designed to hold. It means a person can be lifted off their feet by the crowd and carried through the doors without ever choosing to move. "40 million journeys begin like this every day. Not 40 million over a week, 40 million in a single day. More people than live in all of Canada, moving through one city's trains between sunrise and midnight." And yet, that same train, the one packed past the edge of comfort, is, on average, 18 seconds late. Not 18 minutes, 18 seconds, across an entire year. The most overcrowded rail system ever built is also the most precise. On the fast intercity lines, the average delay across a whole year, including typhoons and earthquakes and everything else the sky can throw down, comes to under a minute per train. When a train once left a station 20 seconds early, not late, the company issued a public apology. When another arrived 35 seconds behind schedule, the conductor apologized to every passenger on board. Both of these things are true at the same time. This is a system pushed to the physical limit of how many human bodies you can fit into a steel tube. And it is a system that treats a lost half-minute as a broken promise. Maximum crowding, maximum order. They should not be able to live in the same place. Here, they do. How does a city move 40 million people a day and hold the whole of it to the second? The scale behind that question is almost unreadable. Roughly 150 separate rail lines, more than 2,000 stations, thousands of miles of track laid over and under and through a single metropolitan region, the largest, most tangled, most interconnected urban rail network ever built. No other city comes close. And all of it, every line and every station, exists to answer one demand the geography made unavoidable: move the people or the city stops. To begin to answer that, you have to stand inside the busiest station in the world and feel how little of it makes sense. Shinjuku is not a station in the way most cities mean the word. It is a district that happens to have trains running through its basement. Around 3.5 million people pass through it every single day. More than the entire population of the city of Berlin, funneled through one building and then out again and then back, over and over, from the first train to the last. It has 36 platforms. It has more than 200 exits. 200. A traveller who takes the wrong staircase can surface half a kilometre from where they meant to be, on the far side of a 6-lane road, facing a skyline they do not recognise. Underneath, the trains arrive and leave in a rhythm too fast to count. On the busiest lines feeding the station, a train comes, fills, and pulls away, and the next one is already visible in the tunnel behind it. 2 minutes apart, sometimes less. There is no slack in it. There is no spare platform waiting empty for a train that runs late, because there is no room in the timetable for a train to run late. And at the peak of the morning, at the doors of the most crowded carriages, there are people whose entire job is to push. They wear white gloves. They are polite. They wait until the last possible second, and then they lean their weight into the mass of passengers already inside and press, firmly, evenly, until the final commuter clears the door line and the doors can close. The word for them translates roughly as pusher. They exist because the alternative is worse. A single door held open by a trapped coat, a single bag caught in the gap, delays the train. A delayed train delays the one behind it. And on a line running trains 2 minutes apart, that delay does not stay small. It spreads. So here is the first strange thing about the busiest station on Earth. From the outside, looks like chaos. A flood of people with no channel, no order, no one in charge. Stand in it for a morning and you see the opposite. Every one of those 3.5 million people is moving inside a system so tightly wound that a lost few seconds is felt across the network. The crowd is not the failure of the order. The crowd is what the order was built to carry. Which raises a question you cannot help but ask, standing on that platform, watching trains you did not schedule arrive at a time you cannot predict, run by companies whose names you may not know. Who is steering all of this? And how does anyone hold it together? The answer is not on the platform. It is in a room most passengers will never see. Somewhere above the tracks, in a building without a name on the door, is a control room. Screens line the walls, and on those screens the whole of a line is drawn, every station, every train, moving as a point of light along a schedule. This is where the trains are actually run. For decades, this work was done by hand, at each station, by people watching their own small stretch of track. In the mid-1990s, that changed. A new system was built to gather the whole of a line into one place, to watch every train at once, to see a delay the moment it began, and to adjust the trains around it before the delay could grow. It was first switched on for a single line running west out of the city, then another, until most of the metropolitan network was watched this way. What the system does is subtle, and it is the heart of the precision. It does not simply run trains to a timetable, it runs them to a timetable with tiny margins hidden inside it, a few seconds of slack built into each segment of the journey, invisible to the passenger, there for one purpose. When a train falls a little behind, it does not stay behind. It spends those hidden seconds catching up, a fraction faster here, a few seconds shorter at a platform there, until it is back on schedule and the margin is restored, ready for the next small shock. The intercity system has its own version, older and even more exact, that keeps the fast trains spaced and timed as they leave the city, one every 3 or 4 minutes at the peak, each one departing not to the minute, but to the second. But the machines are only half of it. The people who run this network have a word for the other half. They call it humanware. The drivers who stop a train so precisely that the doors line up with marks painted on the platform. The dispatchers who, when something goes wrong, decide in seconds which train to hold and which to let run, to keep a single delay from becoming 100. The station staff who coordinate a departure down to the last 2 or 3 seconds. The stopping is its own discipline. On the most crowded platforms, walls of steel now stand at the edge, with doors of their own that must line up exactly with the doors of the train. A train that stops even half a meter off the mark leaves its doors misaligned with the platforms, and at these volumes, a door that will not open is a door's worth of crowd left stranded, and a train held while it sorts itself out. So the drivers stop to the mark, again and again, hundreds of times a shift, bringing a machine weighing hundreds of tons to rest within centimeters of a painted line. What looks like a simple halt is a feat of judgment, repeated so often and so reliably that no one aboard ever notices it happening. The precision is not one clever machine. It is a machine, and a timetable of hidden margins, and thousands of people trained to treat the schedule as a thing that must not be allowed to slip. Take away any one of those, and the 18 seconds a year becomes something else entirely. The machinery tells you how the trains are run. It does not tell you the shape they run in. And that shape has a center, a single loop of track, wrapped around the old heart of the city. They call it the Yamanote. It is a ring, running endlessly in both directions around the core, connecting almost every major hub to every other. A train comes roughly every 2 minutes. It never really begins and never really ends. It simply circles all day, from before dawn until past midnight, a moving thread that ties the whole center together. Everything else hangs off that ring. The private lines built by the suburban companies come racing in from the hills and the outer plain, and where they meet the loop, they stop. And there, at the meeting point, a great terminal grows. Shinjuku is one, so is Shibuya, where the crossing outside the station fills, at each change of the lights, with a flood of people moving in every direction at once and somehow never colliding. So is Ikebukuro, and the central station that carries the city's own name, and half a dozen more. Each is a place where the ring meets the radials, where the trains from the suburbs pour their passengers into the loop, and the loop carries them across the core. And from the grandest of these hubs, another kind of train departs. The fast intercity lines that run to the distant cities of the country, leaving at the peak as often as one every 3 or 4 minutes, timed to the second like everything else. The ring gathers the region. The radials feed the ring. The intercity lines carry the whole thing outward to the rest of the nation. Draw it on a map, and it looks less like a transit system than like a living thing. A heart, with arteries reaching to the edges of the plane and beyond. So the machinery answers part of the question, but it does not answer the hardest part, because no amount of clever scheduling changes the simple, brutal arithmetic of the morning. Twice a day, this city tries to move more people through its trains than the trains can hold. At the peak of the rush, the crowding is not a discomfort, it is a physical event. Bodies pressed close enough that breathing becomes something you do carefully. Arms pinned. A stranger's back against your chest for 20 minutes. On the worst lines, at the worst hour, there is a specific, learned way of standing. Feet planted, weight balanced, eyes fixed on nothing, that everyone in the carriage has practiced without ever being taught. It lasts, at its worst, only a couple of hours, the narrow window of the morning peak, and again in the evening. In those windows, the busiest lines carry nearly twice the load they were built for. A train arrives already full, and somehow takes on more. The next arrives 2 minutes later and does the same. For that window, the network runs at the very edge of what steel and bodies can bear. And then it passes. By the middle of the morning, the same carriage that could not hold another soul runs half empty. A few passengers scattered across seats that were, an hour before, a standing crush. The extremity is not the normal state of the system. It is a tide that rises twice a day and falls between. But at its height, it is the most concentrated movement of human beings anywhere on the planet, repeated, without fail, every working morning. It is easy from the outside to turn this into a spectacle, to make it a story about how strange it is, how extreme. But watch the faces in that carriage and the story changes. There is no panic in them. There is patience. A shared, unspoken agreement that this is the cost of getting to work, and that everyone in the carriage is paying it together, and that making it harder for anyone else, pushing, shoving, taking more space than you need, is the one thing no one does. Over the years, the system has bent itself around the human cost of the crush. Barriers were built along the platform edges, waist-high walls of steel that stay closed until the train arrives and its doors line up with theirs, so that no one, however tightly the crowd presses, can be pushed into the path of a train. Certain carriages were set aside during the rush hours for women only, a response to what the density of bodies made possible in the dark of a packed train. None of this makes the crush comfortable. It was never going to be comfortable. What it does is take a system built to the edge of what people can physically bear and hold it just on the right side of that edge. The dignity is not a given. It is engineered and re-engineered and defended every single morning. There is a small ritual that captures the whole spirit of it. If a train is late, genuinely late, by a few minutes, enough that a passenger might arrive at work behind schedule, the railway hands out slips of paper at the exit. Delay certificates. A commuter takes one, carries it to the office, and shows it to a manager. And the manager understands. It was not your fault. The train was late. The system failed you, and the system is admitting it in writing. Think about what that piece of paper assumes. It assumes that a late train is so rare, so far outside the normal order of things, that it needs to be documented, that without proof, no one would quite believe it happened. In most of the world, a late train is Tuesday. Here, it is an event that comes with paperwork. It is tempting to read all of this from the outside and call it obsession. A culture so fixated on time that it apologises for 20 seconds and issues certificates for 5 minutes. But that reading gets the direction backwards. The precision is not a national quirk that the trains happen to reflect. The precision is a necessity that the whole society has organised itself around, because of something in the ground beneath the city and something in the arithmetic of how many people have to be here at all. To understand why this city runs the way it does, you have to leave the platforms and rise above the buildings and look at the shape of the land itself. Japan is a country of mountains. Most of it stands too steep to build on, folded into ridges and valleys, forested and sharp. The flat land, the land where a city can actually spread, is rare, and it clings to the coasts in narrow strips. One of those strips is not narrow. In the east of the main island, facing the Pacific, the mountains fall back and open into the largest plain in the country. Level ground, stretching more than 100 miles, mild in climate, ringed by hills, and sitting at the head of a deep, sheltered bay. In a country that runs short of flat land, this was the one place that had it in abundance. So the people came and kept coming. Today, nearly a third of the entire nation lives on this single plain. Around 37 million people crowded onto the one large piece of ground the geography allowed. It is the most concentrated mass of humanity anywhere on the planet, and it exists here for a reason as old as the land. This is where there was room. But room to stand is not the same as room to live, and the plain hides a second truth that shapes everything. It cannot feed itself. 37 million people cannot be fed from the fields around them, however fertile. It cannot power itself from anything beneath it. Nearly everything this population needs to survive, most of its food, almost all of its energy, comes from somewhere else. Grain from across oceans, fuel from the other side of the world. The plain that holds a third of the country produces only a fraction of what that third consumes. Which means this city lives, permanently, on the far end of a supply line it does not control. Everything must be brought in. Everything must keep moving. A city that cannot feed itself has no option to slow down, because the moment things stop moving, the shelves begin to empty. And here the two pressures meet. Too many people on too little land, dependent on a constant flow of everything from outside. A city like that cannot be a city of cars. There is not enough room for 37 million people to each drive. There is not enough road, not enough space to park, not enough hours in a day to sit in the traffic that would follow. The density that the plane made possible would strangle itself the moment it tried to move by road. So the city made a different choice long ago and has never been able to unmake it. It chose to move on rails. And once it chose rails, the rails became the one thing that could never be allowed to fail. The precision, the pushers, the certificates, the margins hidden in the timetable, none of it is obsession. It is what happens when a city with no room to spare stakes its entire existence on the trains arriving. And so, twice a day, the whole plane breathes. The people who work in the core do not, for the most part, live in it. They live out along the radial lines, in the ring of suburbs and satellite cities that spread across the plain and into the neighbouring regions on every side. In the morning, the outer plane empties inward. In the evening, it fills again. 37 million people exhaling toward the centre at dawn and drawing back toward the edges at dusk, on a tide so regular you could set a clock by it. And, in fact, the whole city does. The distances are not small. A commute of an hour each way is ordinary. 2 hours is not rare. People rise in the dark in towns an entire province away, board a train that will carry them across the boundaries of 3 or 4 local governments, and reach a desk in the core without ever touching a road. The suburbs that empty each morning were, many of them, built by the very railway companies whose trains now carry their residents in. The houses and the line laid down together decades ago, precisely so that this daily tide would flow. It is a strange thing to hold in the mind. A region the size of a small country, its entire population organised around a single daily rhythm, its homes and its workplaces separated by design and bridged twice a day by trains. Because the plane had room for the people, but only if the people agreed to live at one end of it and work at the other, and to cross the distance between on rails. Where do you go to see how the flow works? The flow this city depends on and cannot survive without. You go to the water's edge, to the ground that isn't even ground. Much of the bayfront of this city was, not long ago, sea. Over the last century, the shallow edges of the bay were filled in. Earth and rubble poured into the water until the water became land. Around 1/7 of the bay's original surface has been turned solid this way, engineered up out of the shallows to make space the plane could not otherwise provide. Some of that fill has a history that is hard to hear. When a great earthquake struck the region and burned much of the old city to the ground, the rubble of the destroyed districts, the broken timber, the shattered stone, was carried down to the water and used to build new land. The city was, in a real sense, rebuilt on top of its own ruins, extended out into the bay on the wreckage of what had been lost. On some of that made ground stands the market, the place where much of the city's fresh food arrives, is sorted, is sold, and is sent onward before dawn. Before it moved here, it stood for generations in the old heart of the city. Now it works from the reclaimed shore. Tons of fish and produce flowing in by night, broken down into the streams that feed thousands of restaurants and shops, and out again before the morning rush begins. And this is the loop that the geography set turning. The plain cannot feed the plain. So the food comes in, across the ocean, up the coast, into the port and the market on the made land at the water's edge. From there it moves inland, and much of that final movement runs alongside and depends upon the same network that moves the people. The trains that carry the workers and the systems that carry the food are not two separate cities. They are the same circulatory system, moving different things through the same veins, on the same schedule, at the same time. Remember the plain that could not feed itself? This is its answer. A coastline built from ruins, a market on reclaimed water, and a flow of everything the city eats arriving in the dark, so that by the time the first commuters reach the platforms, the shelves are already full. And the timing of it is its own quiet machine. The food must move while the city sleeps, not by preference, but by necessity. The same roads and rails that will soon be claimed by 40 million commuters cannot also be carrying the day's freight. So the deliveries run against the passenger tide in the empty hours. The market working through the night, the trucks fanning out before dawn, the shops restocked in the dark, everything that must arrive, arriving before the first train fills. By the time the platforms begin to crowd, the other city, the city of goods, has already done its work and withdrawn. The two flows share the same veins, and so they cannot share the same hours. One moves at night, so the other can move by day. Neither could run if the other did not keep to its side of the clock. This is the interdependence again, hiding in plain sight. The precision that gets a commuter to a desk at 9 is the same precision that got the fish to the counter at 5. It is one discipline, one schedule, one refusal to let anything slip, applied to people in the daylight and to everything else in the dark. Stop the night, and the day has nothing to sell. Stop the day, and the night has no one to sell to. But none of this explains the strangest thing of all. Not the precision, not the geography, the ownership. You would assume, watching a system this vast and this coordinated, that one hand controls it, one authority, one master plan, a single company or a single government running the whole of it to a single design. It is almost the opposite. The railways of this city are not one network, they are dozens. Most of the lines are owned by private companies, separate businesses, competitors, each running its own trains on its own tracks, each drawing its own map. There is no single operator. There never was. What looks from above like one nervous system is, underneath, a patchwork of rival companies stitched together at the edges. It began underground, and it began small. December 1927. Beneath the streets of the old city, the country's first subway opens, a single short line running barely a couple of miles under the busiest district. It is a marvel, and it is a proof. Trains beneath a crowded city can work and can pay. Within a few years, rival businessmen are petitioning to build their own lines, laying their own track, extending their own reach. No single authority draws a master plan. Each company builds toward the profit it can see. And the patchwork we ride today, the dozens of separate owners stitched together at their edges, grows, line by competing line, out of that first short tunnel and the scramble that followed it. The city's network was never designed as one thing. It accumulated, company by company, into one thing. And the strangest part is how those companies make their money. Because most of them, for all the trains they run, do not really live off the trains at all. To see how that came to be, you have to go back to one man and one idea early in the last century. His name was Kobayashi Ichizo. He ran a small railway on the edge of another Japanese city, running trains out to a district that was, at the time, mostly empty fields. A railway to nowhere makes no money. There is no one at the far end to ride it. Most operators of the era saw a line like that as a burden, a stretch of track waiting for a town that might never come. Kobayashi saw it differently. He understood that if the railway itself built the town, the railway would own the town's future. So he did exactly that. Along his own line, on the empty land, he built houses and sold them to families who would now, of course, need his trains to reach the city. At the terminal, the busiest point on the line where every passenger passed through, he built a department store so that the crowds he was carrying would shop before they went home. He built a resort at one end of the line to draw weekend riders in the quiet hours. He founded a theater, a famous one, still running to this day, for the same reason. The railway was no longer a railway. It was a machine for creating value along its own tracks. Housing, shops, entertainment, all feeding passengers into the trains, and all made more valuable by the trains that fed them. The fares were almost beside the point. The real business was everything the fares made possible. Other companies watched and understood and copied it. Nowhere more completely than in this city. One builder in particular took the idea and drove it across the hills southwest of the center. His name was Goto Keita. His company set out, in the middle of the last century, to build an entire garden city on rural land beyond the edge of the built-up area. Homes, schools, shops, and the railway to carry the residents in and out, all planned together, all owned by the same hand. Where there had been farmland, there rose suburb after suburb, each one strung along a line the company had laid, each new household a new passenger, each new passenger a reason to extend the line further still. The logic did not stop at housing and department stores. It reached into every space a station touched. The dark arches beneath the elevated tracks, dead ground in most cities, were filled with bars and shops and tiny restaurants, rented out, earning money from land no one else wanted. The premium expresses that some companies still run out to the mountains and hot spring resorts on the edge of the plain are the direct descendants of that first resort at the end of that first line. A comfortable train to a destination the railway itself created, so that the railway could sell you both the journey and the place you were journeying to. And the model still runs. Not long ago, when one of the old companies wanted to lift the value of a neglected stretch of land it owned near the bay, it did the simplest thing its founders would have recognized. It built a new station. A stop on the loop where there had been none. And around that new stop, almost at once, a district began to rise. Towers, offices, homes, on land that had been passed over for a century, made valuable by nothing more than a place for the trains to halt. This is the deep pattern beneath the whole city. A station is never only a station. It is the seed of a neighborhood. And the company that plants it reaps the neighborhood that grows. This is why the map of the city looks the way it does, a knot of separately owned lines, each radiating out to the suburbs its own company built. The lines are not arbitrary. Each one is the spine of a small, private world. The homes, the stations, the department stores at the terminals, the shopping streets beneath the tracks, all belonging to the company whose trains run above and below. And it is why, to this day, these companies earn most of their income not from moving people, but from the land and the shops and the property the moving of people created. For the major private railways, the trains themselves are often only a slice of the business. The larger part, sometimes the great majority, comes from real estate, from retail, from the ecosystem of stores and offices and hotels clustered around the stations. Reliable train fares, unglamorous but steady, underwrite a far larger and more profitable empire of property. So here is the thing the precision was hiding. The train company that runs your line to the second, that apologizes for 20 seconds, that hands you a certificate when it fails. It may not make its living from your fare at all. It runs the trains flawlessly, because flawless trains fill the department store at the terminal and raise the value of the houses along the line and bring the crowds to the shops beneath the viaduct. The obsession with the timetable is not sentiment. It is the engine of a much larger business. Move the people perfectly, and everything else the company owns grows richer. But this raises a problem that should, by every logic, tear the whole system apart. If the network is a patchwork of rival companies, each with its own trains, its own tracks, its own suburbs to protect, then how does a passenger move across it? How do you cross a city carved up between competitors without stopping at every border to change trains and buy a new ticket from a company that would rather you rode its line and no one else's? The answer is a small piece of plastic, and it is one of the quiet marvels of the whole system. A single prepaid card tapped at a gate. That is all it takes. One tap to enter, one tap to leave, and the fare is calculated and deducted automatically, however many companies' lines you crossed in between. Think about what that single tap conceals. A journey across this city might begin on one company's line, pass onto a second's, dip into a third's subway, and end on a fourth's. 4 separate businesses, 4 separate owners, 4 sets of tracks. And yet the passenger pays once, with one card, and never thinks about the borders at all. And the gates themselves are a marvel of flow. At the mouth of a great station, dozens of them stand side by side, and through them the crowd pours without ever slowing. A tap of the card, a fraction of a second, and the panels stay open and the walker never breaks stride. No fumbling for a ticket, no pause at a barrier. The gate reads the card, decides in that instant whether to let the person through, calculates a fare across a journey that may have crossed 4 companies, and opens. Tens of thousands of times an hour at a single station in an unbroken stream. It has to be this fast. A gate that made each passenger stop, even for a second, would back the crowd up into the concourse, and the concourse into the platform, and the platform into the trains. At these volumes, a 1-second delay per person is not an inconvenience. It is a wall. So the whole design bends toward flow. Keep everyone moving, never let
the crowd stop. Make the taps so quick, it feels like no barrier at all. The gate is not there to stop people, it is there to count them without ever slowing them down. Behind that tap is an invisible accounting system of extraordinary reach. Every crossing, every transfer, every fraction of every fare is recorded and divided and settled between the companies. Money flowing quietly from operator to operator, so that each one is paid exactly for the stretch of track the passenger used. Around 30 separate companies, rivals in every other sense, share one seamless payment system and split the proceeds among themselves without the traveller ever seeing the seam. Remember the single tap. One card, one gesture, 30 rivals paid. Hold on to it, because it is the smaller version of the thing that makes the whole city possible. The thing that answers, at last, the question we started with. But before we reach it, there is one more part of the machine to see. The part that only exists when almost everyone is asleep. Around midnight, the last trains run. The crowds thin. The final commuters step off onto quieting platforms, and the barriers close, and the lights in the station dim. And for a few hours, the narrow gap between the last train of the night and the first of the morning, the network falls silent. That silence is not rest. It is the only time the system can be repaired. In the dark, the work begins. Crews move onto the tracks that were, an hour before, carrying trains every 2 minutes. They walk the rails, checking for wear. They tighten what has loosened under the day's weight. They replace what is close to failing before it can fail. They inspect the signals, the switches, the ground beneath the sleepers. Everything that the day's 40 million journeys quietly damaged is found and mended in a window of a few hours, so that when the first train runs at dawn, the track beneath it is whole again. The system does not simply run through the day. Every night, it rebuilds itself, quietly, invisibly, in the hours no passenger sees. The flawless morning is not luck. It is the product of a night shift that most of the city will never think about, working against a clock as tight as any the daytime trains keep. By the time the pushers take their positions at the platform edge, the whole network has already been checked, mended, and made ready, in the dark, by people who will be gone before the first commuter arrives. And still, with all of it, the machines and the margins and the human wear and the night shift, the system can be stopped. Not by any flaw in its engineering, by something no engineering can fully prevent. There is a phrase in this city that every regular commuter knows. It means, in plain translation, a personal injury accident. It appears on the delay boards, and when it does, the passengers reading it understand what it means. Someone is on the tracks. Sometimes it is a fall, a person carried too close to the edge by an overcrowded platform, or unsteady after a long night. Sometimes it is not a fall. Sometimes a person has chosen the tracks, at the end of something the city could not help them carry. When it happens, the line stops. It has to. And the stopping does not stay on one line. Because of everything this city built to make itself efficient, a single stop does not stay small. The trains run too close together for the delay to be absorbed. The stopped train holds the one behind it, which holds the one behind that, and within minutes, the delay has climbed backwards along the line, station by station, until the whole line is stalled. And then it crosses over, because these lines do not end at their own edges, into the next company's tracks, and the next, until a single tragedy in one place has slowed trains bound for the far side of the city, carrying people who will never know why. It is the shadow side of the interdependence. The same connection that lets one card cross 30 companies, that lets one train run seamlessly from suburb to city centre, that same connection means a stop anywhere becomes a stop everywhere. The system's greatest strength and its deepest vulnerability are the same fact. Everything holds everything else up, which means everything can bring everything else down. Let that sit for a moment, because it is not a problem the city has solved. It is a cost the city carries, built into the very design that makes the trains so precise. But the city does not simply suffer the cascade, it fights it, in real time, in those same control rooms, by people whose whole skill is stopping one delay from becoming 100. When a line goes down, the dispatchers do not wait for it to recover. Within seconds, they begin to reshape the network around the wound. A train that would have run through onto the stored line is turned back short of it and sent instead down a different route. Services are thinned here, added there. Trains are held at junctions to keep them from piling into the blockage. On the boards, passengers are told which lines are still moving and which to abandon. The aim is not to fix the stopped line. That will take as long as it takes. The aim is to keep the delay from spreading through the rest of the web while it heals. It is the human wear again, doing the thing no timetable can do on its own, making hundreds of small decisions fast under pressure to protect the whole from the failure of one part. The margins hidden in the schedule buy back the ordinary seconds. The dispatchers, in the bad hours, buy back the network itself. Weather does the same in its own way. A typhoon, heavy snow, a strong wind across an elevated section of track. Any of these can slow the trains or stop them. An earthquake stills the whole network in an instant, automatically, until the tracks can be checked. The city that runs to the second lives on ground that shakes, beneath a sky that turns violent. On a coast the storms come to first. The precision is not the absence of threat. It is a discipline held up against a constant one. And knowing all of that, the crush, the cascade, the shaking ground, the 30 rival owners, the plane that cannot feed itself, the real question sharpens into something almost impossible to believe. How does a city split between dozens of competing companies running trains at twice their capacity on a network where a single stop spreads everywhere, on ground that shakes and a coast the storms hit first? How does it move 40 million people a day and still hold the whole thing to 18 seconds a year? The answer is the thing we have been circling from the start, and it is not what it appears to be. You would expect the answer to be central control. One authority, one master plan, one mind holding the whole system together and steering it from above. It is the opposite. There is no single mind. There is no master operator. What holds this network together is not control. It is dependence. Chosen, deliberate, engineered dependence between companies who are, in every other respect, rivals. Here is how it actually works. In most cities, when you reach the end of one company's line, you get off and you change to another. Here, more often than not, you do not. The train you are sitting on simply keeps going, off its own company's tracks and directly onto a rival's. A suburban train, run by one company, reaches the edge of the old city, and instead of stopping, dives underground and becomes a subway train, running through the heart of the city on tracks owned by someone else entirely. And at the far side, it may surface again onto a third company's line and run on into another suburb, without the passenger ever leaving their seat. They call it, in careful, deliberate language, mutual through service, reciprocal direct operation. What it means is that separate, competing railways have agreed to run their trains onto each other's tracks, to weave their networks together so completely that the borders between them disappear. The scale of it is hard to hold in the mind. On the city's subway, most of the lines run this way, threaded through with the trains of outside companies that continue straight onto them from the suburbs. On some routes, a single journey runs across the tracks of half a dozen independent operators in sequence. 6 separate companies' rails, 6 separate owners, stitched into one unbroken ride from one side of the region to the other.
Follow one such train in your mind. It begins its run far out on the plain, in the territory of a suburban company, as that company's train in that company's colors. It gathers commuters through the outer stations. Then it reaches the edge of
the old city. And instead of terminating, it drops into a tunnel and becomes, without stopping, a subway train, running through the core on track owned by an entirely different operator. Its doors open at underground stations that belong to no one it started with. And at the far side of the center, it climbs back into daylight onto the rails of a third company and carries its passengers on into a suburb on the opposite side of the region. A suburb its original owner never reached and never will. The people aboard have not moved seats. Many have not looked up. They boarded a train in one company's town and will step off in another's. And in between, the ground beneath them changed hands twice, and the fare was quietly split 3 ways. And none of it required them to do anything but sit. 1 journey, 1 seat, 3 owners, no seam. The passenger taps 1 card and sits in 1 seat, and beneath them, the ownership of the very steel they are riding on changes, again and again, without a single seam they can feel. And this is the whole answer. This is why the trains are so precise. Because when your train runs onto my tracks and my train runs onto yours, your delay becomes my delay. Instantly. A train that falls behind on one company's suburban line carries that delay directly into another company's subway and out again onto a third's. There is nowhere for a delay to hide. It cannot be contained within one operator, because no journey stays within one operator. So every company in the web has the same absolute interest. Hold to the schedule, to the second, because a lost second is not just your problem. It is instantly everyone's problem. The precision is not imposed from above by a single authority. It rises up from below, out of mutual dependence. Because in a network this interwoven, no one can afford to be the one who falls behind. The 18 seconds a year is not the achievement of one great operator. It is the price 30 rivals pay to be able to depend on each other completely. Look again now at the busiest station in the world. 3.5 million people a day, moving through 36 platforms, on trains run by companies that compete for their business, on tracks that belong to a patchwork of owners, cleared by a settlement system that pays each rival its due, watched by control rooms full of hidden margins, pushed through closing doors by gloved hands, on a plane that cannot feed itself, above a bay built from its own ruins, mended every night in the dark, held to the second not by a master, but by the simple, unforgiving fact that they all now rise or fall together. Nothing here works alone. Not one train, not one company, not one line. Remove a single part, one stopped train, one failed signal, one operator falling behind, and the effect does not stay where it started. It travels. The whole thing is one machine now, made of rivals, and it runs on the fact that none of them can succeed unless all of them do. That is the marvel of this city, and it is not the marvel you would expect. It is not the engineering, remarkable as the engineering is. It is not the punctuality, or the scale, or the technology in the control rooms. It is the agreement. Every morning, 40 million people step onto a network held together
by nothing more solid than the mutual reliance of companies who would, in any other business, be trying to beat each other. A passenger trusts, without ever thinking about it, that a train drawn by a company they have never heard of, running on rails owned by another, cleared by a third, will arrive at the second, because everyone in the web has agreed that it must. And that is the tension the city can never quite put down. The same dependence that makes it work is the dependence that could stop it. It never fails, and it could always fail, for exactly the same reason. Take away the agreement, and the trains do not slow, they seize. The whole delicate weave of it holds, morning after morning, on the willingness of 30 rivals to keep depending on one another, to the second, forever. No one is in charge of it. That is the secret. There is no master, no central mind, no single hand on the whole of it. 40 million people move each day through a city no one operator controls, carried by a web that holds precisely because everyone in it has agreed, morning after morning, to hold
everyone else up. Whether it can go on holding, as the ground shakes, as the storms come, as the crowds press harder against the doors, no one can promise. It has held so far on the strength of an agreement no law fully requires and no authority fully commands. How long a city can run on trust alone, at twice its capacity, to the second, is a question the morning answers again every single day. And never answers for good. Thank you for traveling with us. Until the next journey.